The silence that followed those clicks was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my Santa Fe studio. For years, the background hum of my life had been the rhythmic digital cha-ching of money leaving my account to patch holes in lives I didn't live. Now, there was just the whir of my computer fan and the steady, rhythmic breathing of Curry. He didn't know I'd just declared a private war. He just knew that my foot had stopped tapping nervously. He let out a soft, huffy snort, the kind of sound a dachshund makes when they've decided a situation is finally acceptable, and burrowed his nose deeper into my slipper. I sat there for an hour, staring at the screen, waiting for the sky to fall. It didn't. Then, at 5:14 p.m., the first crack appeared. My phone didn't ring, it shrieked. A text from Bailey, my brother-in-law, the man who'd found himself in 4 different failed startups, all funded by my late nights. "Hey Sandra, card declined at the mechanic. Need a quick 400 to get the truck back." I didn't reply. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear like a ghost. 10 minutes later, Sabrina called, my sister, the one who thought I'd ruined the mood in Aspen. I let it go to voicemail. "Sandra, Bailey says there's a glitch. Mom is trying to pay the electric bill and it's saying insufficient funds. Call her back. We have a flight in the morning and she's stressed." Stressed. She was stressed because the mood was being threatened by a lack of my ruinous money. I looked down at Curry. He hopped up, his long body stretching like a piece of cinnamon taffy, and trotted toward the door. He gave one sharp, authoritative bark. It wasn't a feed me bark, it was a we are going for a walk and we are not looking back bark. I grabbed my keys. I didn't call my mother, Matilda. I didn't explain. I just locked the door to my beautiful, expensive, lonely studio. The Santa Fe air was crisp, smelling of piñon smoke and freedom. For the first time in a decade, my bank balance was for me. And for the first time in my life, I realized that if the only thing holding my family together was a direct deposit, then I wasn't losing a family, I was losing a debt. I looked at the sunset over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and realized the glitch was actually my first real breath of air. The next morning, I woke up to the soft, rhythmic clicking of Curry's nails. Usually, that signaled a walk, but today he just paced, his long body tense. He knew the air in the apartment had changed. I reached for my phone and my stomach twisted into a knot. There it was, the Instagram notification I'd been dreading. Sabrina Henderson had posted a carousel of glossy, high-definition moments from Aspen. There she was, in front of a luxury timber resort, draped in a fur-lined coat that cost more than my mortgage. My parents, Richard and Matilda, were flanking her, radiant and carefree against the snow-dusted peaks. The caption read, "Weekend escape with my favorite people. Family time is everything." I scrolled through, my vision blurring. Dad holding ski poles, Mom laughing by a stone fireplace, Bailey posing with a snowmobile I'd indirectly subsidized. I looked for a tag, a mention, a "wish you were here, Sandra." Nothing, not a single trace that I existed. I wasn't an invitee in their world. I was the infrastructure. I was the ghost who funded the haunting. Curry hopped up onto the bed, his stubby legs working hard. He nudged my hand away from the glowing screen, pushing his wet nose against my palm. He was a grounding force, a reminder that while they were playing at a life they couldn't afford, I was here with the only creature who didn't require a bank transfer to show up. I looked at the cancel confirmations in my email, the electricity, the water, the allowance for Sabrina's credit. "I think they wanted a break from me, Curry," I whispered. "I think it's time I gave them a permanent one." I dialed my father. He answered on the third ring, the clinking of an expensive restaurant in the background. "Hey, sweetie," he said, light and casual. "I saw the photos, Dad," I said, my voice sharp. "You're in Aspen." He muffled the phone to talk to a waiter. "Yeah, Sabrina booked it last minute. She said you needed a break, Sandra, that you've been working too hard and she didn't want you to feel pressured to come." "A break from my own family?" I asked quietly. "Don't take it personally," he murmured. "Your sister just wanted peace." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, the hum of disconnection ringing in my ears. Beside me, Curry let out a low, protective growl at the silent phone. He didn't like the tone of that conversation any more than I did. Peace. That was the word they used to describe my absence. Fine. If my presence ruined the mood, I was about to show them exactly how expensive a peaceful vacation could really be. The rest of the day passed in fragments of simulated focus. I stared at a client's floor plan, but all I could see were the snow-dusted mountains in Sabrina's photos. Every time I sketched a line, I thought of that caption, "My favorite people." By evening, the silence pressed in like thick desert air. I sat on the floor with Curry, who was systematically disemboweling a plush squirrel. He'd pause to give an empathetic thump of his tail. He was the only one who didn't view my presence as a pressure to be managed. I opened my laptop and started digging into the joint account I'd opened for emergencies, the one my mother, Matilda Garner, had access to. I realized that over 6 months, she'd been withdrawing small amounts, 50 here, 100 there, for botanical supplements and wellness consultations. While I was skipping my own dental appointments to ensure their rent was paid, they were treating my bank account like a fountain of youth. "They think I'm a bank, Curry," I whispered, "and banks don't have feelings." Curry abandoned his toy and rested his long, warm body across my lap. He let out a soft huff. It was a wake-up call. I navigated to the joint account settings. My finger hovered over the Withdraw All button. This was the money for my father's hip surgery, the cushion I'd built so they'd never worry. But they weren't worried. They were in Aspen, drinking champagne and celebrating my absence. I clicked. Transfer complete. The balance dropped to 0. It felt like a physical weight lifting, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. I looked at my phone. Sabrina had posted a new story, a slow-motion toast by a roaring bonfire. Family time is everything. I didn't feel fury, I felt a strange, hollow peace. I walked onto my balcony, the cold Santa Fe air biting at my cheeks. "They wanted peace," I said to the wind. "I hope they can afford it." Behind me, Curry let out a sharp, decisive bark at the glass door. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at my phone, which had just begun to glow with a text from my brother-in-law, Bailey. "Hey Sandra, weird question, but did the auto pay for the car insurance bounce? I just got an alert." I watched the screen fade to black. The silence was officially over. The ghost had stopped paying for the haunting, and the first bill had just come due in the middle of their favorite weekend. I looked at Curry and smiled. The mood was about to change, and for the first time, I wasn't the one who was going to ruin it. I didn't reply to Bailey. I didn't even unlock the phone. I just sat on the cold balcony tiles, watching the screen light up again and again. Curry sat by the glass door, his long nose pressed against the pane, watching the device with a low, wary rumble. He knew that vibration meant trouble. "Sandra? Mom says the grocery delivery was declined." That was Matilda. "Hey kiddo, glitch with the joint account. It's showing a 0 balance. Call me." My father, Richard. They weren't calling to apologize for Aspen. They were calling because the invisible machinery that kept their lives running had ground to a halt. The mood they wanted to protect was about to get very expensive. "They finally noticed, Curry," I whispered. He trotted in and did a lap around my legs, his tail whipping. For years, he'd watched me stress over Sabrina's latest financial emergency, which usually meant a designer handbag she couldn't return. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened a blank email. My fingers hovered. I didn't want to be cruel, but I was done being a ghost. To Matilda, Richard, Sabrina. Subject, financial boundaries. Please don't contact me about money again. I need space. I hope you understand, Sandra. I hit send. The whoosh felt like a physical release. No apologies, no let me know if you need anything. Within 10 minutes, the phone wasn't just buzzing, it was screaming. My personal line, my work line, even my Instagram DMs.
Sabrina had transitioned from champagne toasts to frantic demands. I turned the phone off. I looked at a framed photo on my desk, the four of us at a lake years ago. We looked so close. I traced my own smiling face and felt a pang of grief for the girl who thought she could buy a seat at that table. Curry let out a sharp, authoritative bark, pulling me back. He nudged my hand toward his leash. "You're right," I said, grabbing my coat. "We're letting them feel the silence. We're going for a walk." As we stepped into the Santa Fe night, the stars felt closer than they ever had. I wasn't the daughter who paid the bills anymore. I was just Sandra, and for the first time, that was enough. The safety net didn't just snap, it vanished, and I was finally learning how to fly.
By Friday, my phone felt like it was melting. Even with my personal line silenced, the notifications on my laptop were relentless. Sabrina had moved from frantic texts to public warfare. I was in the middle of a kitchen rendering when my friend Lydia sent me a link. "You might want to see this," she warned. I clicked. My stomach dropped. There it was. A Facebook post by Sabrina, a photo of our parents, Richard and Matilda, looking tired and frail on their porch. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Money changes people. Some forget their own blood. Family is a choice, and today mine feels very small." The comments were a bloodbath. Aunt Carol, cousins, family friends, all chiming in about how I'd forgotten who helped me. I sat there, the smell of my cold coffee suddenly nauseating. I hadn't had nothing. I'd worked 2 jobs through college while Sabrina dropped out to find herself on my dime. I'd paid for Aunt Carol's 61st birthday flowers. Curry sensed the spike in my heart rate. He stopped chewing his toy and rested his long, narrow head on my knee, letting out a low, mournful whine. He didn't care about Facebook or sacrifices. He just cared that I was breathing too fast. "I'm the villain now, Curry," I whispered, "for the crime of not paying for their champagne." I started to type a reply. I wanted to list the receipts, the $5,000 for rent, the car insurance for Bailey. I wanted to burn the bridge they were already dousing in gasoline. But Curry let out a sharp, sudden bark. It wasn't his treat bark, it was his danger bark. I looked at the monitor. My office line was ringing. The ID card flashed Jensen Richard, my boss. My blood went cold. My mother hadn't just gone to Facebook, she had gone to my livelihood. She was trying to break the hands that had fed her for a decade. I stared at the blinking light, my hand hovering over the receiver. They weren't just asking for the safety net anymore. They were trying to cut the rope while I was still hanging on it. Curry nudged my hand, his eyes fierce and protective. He knew the predator had reached the door. I took a deep breath, wiped a stray tear, and picked up the phone. The digital hurricane had just made landfall in my real world. I stared at the blinking light on my office phone, my heart hammering. I picked up on the 4th ring. "Hi, Richard," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Sandra, can you come by my office?" Richard Jensen's voice was gentle, but the professional distance made my skin crawl. I looked at Curry. He stood by the desk, tail tucked, his soulful eyes tracking my every move. He let out a soft huffing sound, wanting to guard the door. "Stay, Curry," I whispered. Walking to Jensen's office felt like crossing a desert. On his desk sat a single sheet of paper. "Dear Mr. Jensen, this is Sandra's mother. I'm deeply worried. She's been under stress and not acting like herself. She needs guidance." My jaw went tight. Matilda hadn't just labeled me a villain, she'd labeled me unstable. She had contacted the director of the firm where I'd spent 6 years building my reputation. "I got a message from your mother," Jensen said. He didn't look angry, he looked concerned, which was somehow worse. "I know," I said, clasping my hands to stop the shaking. "I'm just setting boundaries, and they aren't taking it well.
I'm sorry she brought this to your desk." Jensen leaned back, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I've had IT block her address from the office server. You're doing great work, Sandra. Don't let the noise outside distract you from the designs inside." I left his office dizzy with relief. A stranger had shown more respect for my privacy than my own mother ever had. When I got home, the apartment was dim. Curry was wiggling with a frantic joy that felt like a lifeline. He let out a series of happy, yapping barks, circling my feet until I knelt to hug him. "She tried to take my job, Curry," I whispered into his velvet fur. "She tried to break the only thing I built for myself." I looked at my phone. Sabrina had a new story, my parents staring at a stack of bills. The caption, "When the people you love turn their backs, the lights go out." I didn't feel guilt. I felt the fire. I opened my laptop and clicked the block button on Sabrina, then Bailey, then my parents. I was done being the ghost. It was time to let them live in the world they had created. I looked at Curry, his tail now thumping a steady, victorious beat. The bridge was not just burned, the ashes were scattered.
By Monday, the silence from my phone was no longer a void. It was a fortress. I spent the morning in my studio, the desert sun highlighting the dust motes over my fabric swatches. Curry was unusually focused, his long body stretched across my feet as if he were anchoring me to the floor. But the digital world was still burning. Lydia called me at noon. "Sandra, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight. "Sabrina didn't just stop at Facebook, she started a GoFundMe." My heart did a slow, sickening roll. I opened the link. A photo of my father, Richard, looking frail in his armchair. The title, "Helping a Retired Couple Survived by Their Own." The description claimed their primary support had suffered a mental break. I looked at Curry. He looked back, his head tilted, his ears perking at my sharp intake of breath. He let out a low, vibrating growl that rumbled through my boots. He knew a predator when he smelled one, even through a screen. "They're fundraising off my reputation, Curry," I whispered. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Sabrina. Instead, I pulled a thick accordion folder from my mahogany desk. 3 years of their mortgage payments, 8 months of daycare for Sabrina and Bailey's son, 2 wellness retreats for Matilda, totaling over $84,000 in 5 years. I took a high-res photo of the summary. No names, just dates and cold, hard amounts. I posted it with one sentence. "I didn't walk away from family, I walked away from being a bank. Sometimes love gets confused with obligation." The response was a tidal wave, hundreds of shares, college friends and former neighbors chiming in. "Good for you, Sandra. Family shouldn't be a financial hostage situation." The villain narrative was crumbling. Curry hopped onto the sofa, nudging my hand with a frantic, celebratory energy. But as the sun set, casting long, purple shadows across the Santa Fe sand, my doorbell rang. It wasn't a gentle ring. It was the frantic, jagged buzzing of someone who expected to be let in. Curry bolted to the door, his barks sharp and authoritative. I looked through the peephole. It was Matilda, and she wasn't alone. The audit was over, but the confrontation had just moved from the screen to my doorstep. The pounding on the door was rhythmic and heavy, vibrating through the wood. Curry was a blur of cinnamon fur, his paws skidding on the tile as he planted himself in front of the entryway. He let out a low, guttural snarl, the kind he only used at the vet. This territory was no longer open for negotiation. I opened the door just a crack, the security chain engaged. My mother, Matilda Garner, stood there clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Behind her, Sabrina was leaning against the wall, her face a mask of pure, cold fury. "Sandra, open this door," Matilda whispered. "We've been humiliated. Aunt Carol called me crying." "I didn't humiliate you, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "The truth did that. I just stopped hiding the receipts." Sabrina stepped into the light.
You're a sociopath, Sandra. You keep a ledger on your own family? We're your blood, not a business transaction. Curry let out a sharp, piercing bark, his long body quivering. He moved between my feet, his nose pressed against the gap. It became a transaction the moment you started charging me for the privilege of being ignored. The bank is out of cash. We can't pay the mortgage, Matilda wailed, the performance finally cracking. If we don't have $4,000 by Friday, they're starting foreclosure. I looked at her, the woman who told my boss I was unstable, the mother who toasted my absence with champagne. Then talk to Bailey about his new snowmobile, or sell the fur coat Sabrina's wearing in her profile picture. That'll cover a month. You're heartless, Sabrina hissed, reaching out to shove the door. Curry didn't hesitate. He let out a snap, a warning air bite that echoed in the hallway. Sabrina jumped back, eyes wide. My little dachshund stood his ground, a tiny king defending his mountain. He doesn't like intruders, I said, slowly closing the door, and neither do I. Don't come back without an appointment, and don't come back for money. I clicked the deadbolt. I heard Sabrina scream something about regretting this, followed by the retreating stomp of her heels. I slid down the door to the floor. Curry crawled into my lap, his heart thumping against mine. We're the villains, Curry, but at least we have the keys.
The hallway grew quiet, the echo of Sabrina's heels fading into the muffled hum of the apartment. I sat on the floor for a long time, my fingers tangled in Curry's soft ears. He stayed perfectly still, a warm, solid weight in my lap that kept me from floating away into the panic. I walked to my desk and saw the GoFundMe notification. It had been suspended for review of claims, reported by friends and colleagues who saw the receipts. My family had spent years treating my silence as consent, my bank account as a bottomless well. Now that the well was dry, they didn't know how to survive the drought. "They're going to lose the house, Curry," I whispered, "and I'm not reaching for my credit card." Curry hopped onto the chair beside me, resting his chin on the mahogany desk. He didn't see a mortgage, he saw a human finally breathing without a weight on her chest. I checked my email. Richard Jensen had messaged, "Your mother called the office again. I've instructed the receptionist to say you're in a meeting. We've documented the calls. Focus on the project." Relief stung like a physical slap. But then a new tag from Bailey, a photo of my father, Richard, on a packing box. Moving day came early, thanks to family who forgot where they came from. Anyone know a cheap storage unit? We're on the street. I looked closer at the boxes in the background. They were dusty, faded. These weren't packed in a morning panic. They had been sitting in the garage for months. They hadn't been blindsided. They knew foreclosure was coming long before the Aspen trip. They'd spent my $5,000 on a luxury vacation while knowing they were losing their home, betting I'd be the one to bail them out at the 11th hour. "They weren't surprised, Curry," I said, my voice cold. "They were just waiting for me to break." Curry let out a sudden, sharp woof, his ears pinned back. He looked at the staged photo on the screen and let out a sneeze, his universal sign of utter disdain. He wasn't fooled by the dust on those boxes, and finally, neither was I. The emergency was a set piece. The tragedy was a script. I closed the laptop, the glow fading from my face, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like an audience member who had finally stopped clapping for a bad play. The photo of my father on the packing crate was a masterpiece of emotional extortion, but the dust on those boxes told a different story. I sat at my desk while Curry paced a tight circle around my chair. He was restless, his long tail sweeping the floor like a broom. I opened my banking app. I scrolled back, not months, but years.
I began to tally the emergencies that miraculously coincided with my career milestones. 3,000 for Matilda the week I became senior designer, 2,500 for Bailey the day I got my holiday bonus. They hadn't just been using me for survival, they'd been harvesting my success to ensure I never rose far enough to leave. They've been keeping me small, Curry, I whispered. Curry hopped onto the mahogany desk, his paws clicking softly. He sat right on my mousepad, forcing me to look at him. He let out a low, grounding huff. He didn't care about the $84,000. He cared about the woman who'd forgotten to breathe. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my mother. I called their property manager in Albuquerque, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, my father posted that they're being evicted today. A long pause. Evicted? Sandra, the lease isn't up for 3 months. I gave them a notice of non-renewal in January. They signed a new lease on a smaller place across town 2 weeks ago. I assumed you knew. My heart went cold. A smaller place? Yeah, your sister helped them move the small stuff over the weekend. The Aspen trip hadn't been a last-minute escape. It was a victory lap, funded by the money I thought was saving their home. They had a new roof over their heads while posting photos on the street to guilt me into one last payout. Curry let out a sharp, decisive bark toward the balcony. He was telling me it was time to change the scenery. You're right, I said. The drama is a stage play, Curry, and I'm exiting the theater. As we walked through the Santa Fe Plaza, the air smelling of roasted piñón, I felt a strange, shimmering lightness. The crisis was a lie. My parents weren't homeless, they were just downsized, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't have to pay for the move. I looked down at Curry, his cinnamon fur glowing in the streetlights. He knew the script was shredded, he knew the lead actress had finally walked off the set, and he was ready for the sequel. The weight of the truth felt like armor. They hadn't been blindsided, they'd been budgeting for my guilt. I sat on a park bench in the plaza, Curry perched regally beside me, his nose twitching as he tracked a nearby guitar case. I pulled out my phone and did something I had never done. I told the whole story. I didn't vent, I didn't name call, I simply posted a thread of screenshots. The emergency texts from Matilda, the Venmo receipts for Bailey's car, and the time-stamped email from the property manager confirming the new lease. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, I wrote, and sometimes you have to lose people to find peace. I'm choosing peace. I hit post. Within 30 minutes, the tide turned. The aunts and cousins who had been cheering for Sabrina went silent. The GoFundMe was taken down for fraud. The villain narrative was dead, replaced by thousands of comments from strangers who had lived through the same financial vampirism. Thank you for saying what we're too afraid to, one comment read. It had 10,000 likes by sunset. Curry let out a sudden, sharp bark at a passing pigeon, snapping me out of the digital ether. He looked up at me, his soulful eyes bright, and gave my hand a firm, wet lick. He didn't care about the 20,000 shares. He cared that I was finally looking at the mountains instead of my banking app. "You're right, Curry," I whispered. "The world is bigger than their living room." We walked back to the apartment, the desert sky turning a bruised, beautiful purple. But as we reached my door, I saw a familiar shadow leaning against the wall. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't Sabrina. It was Bailey, and he looked like a man who had just realized his free ride hit a brick wall. The car insurance was the least of his problems now. I slowed my pace, my hand tightening on the leash. Curry didn't need a command. He stepped in front of me, his hackles rising, a low vibration starting in his chest that meant the sidewalk was closed to no authorized personnel. The viral reclaiming was done, but the human debris was still blocking my path. I looked at Bailey, then at Curry, and I realized I wasn't afraid of the ghost anymore. I was the one who held the deed. Music swells into a confident, foot-stomping folk rhythm, earthy and undeniable. The sound of a dog's low protective growl and the steady, unblinking silence of a woman who owes nothing fade into a sharp, expectant quiet.
Bailey didn't look like the confident man from the Aspen photos. His expensive puffer vest was unzipped, and he was pacing a tight line in front of my door. When he saw me, his face shifted, not into an apology, but a desperate agitation. Curry didn't wait for a greeting. He planted his paws firmly on the carpet and let out a low, sustained growl. It was a sound that said, "I remember you, and you don't belong here." "Sandra, finally," Bailey said, stepping forward. "Can you quiet the dog? I've been waiting an hour." "He's fine where he is, Bailey," I said, hand firm on the leash. "Why are you here? I blocked everyone for a reason." "The Facebook post, the receipts. You've made Sabrina a pariah," he hissed. "Her boutique's page is getting flooded with hate. You're destroying her business over a misunderstanding about a vacation." I looked at the designer watch on his wrist, a birthday gift from Sabrina, funded by a loan I had given her for inventory. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an audit. You knew about the move in January, didn't you?" Bailey's eyes shifted. He didn't deny it. "It's complicated, Sandra. The parents needed a win. They were depressed about downsizing. The trip was a last hurrah. We thought you'd see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture was me paying for champagne when I wasn't allowed in the room," I replied. "I'm done being the silent partner in your lifestyle. Tell Sabrina to turn off her comments. I'm not retracting anything." "The bank is calling in the personal loan for the car," he said, his voice cracking. "The one you said you'd backstop. If you don't transfer the payment by tomorrow, they're repossessing it." Curry let out a sharp, sudden yip, a sound of pure canine mockery. He sat down and began calmly licking his paw, completely unimpressed. "Then I guess you'll be taking the bus," I said. I moved past him to unlock the leash. Bailey reached to grab my arm, but Curry was faster. He didn't bite, but he snapped his jaws with a loud clack, inches from Bailey's fingers. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice cold as mountain air. "And don't come back. The account is closed. For everyone." I stepped inside and shut the door. I heard Bailey kick the wall in frustration before storming off. I unclipped Curry's leash. He trotted to his water bowl, took a long drink, and looked at me with a wagging tail, a dog who'd finished a hard day's work. "He's losing the car, Curry," I whispered, leaning against the counter. "And I don't feel a thing." I checked my phone. One new notification. Flight to Seattle confirmed. The high desert was behind me, the rain was calling, and for the first time, I wasn't leaving a trail for them to follow.
The text from Lydia came through just as I was zip-tying my suitcase for Seattle. I expected drama, but it was a photo of a dusty box on a curb. "Saw your mom dropping this at the thrift shop," Lydia wrote. "It had your name on it. I grabbed it before the truck came." I met her 20 minutes later. Curry sat alert, scanning for a tail. When Lydia handed me the box, my breath hitched. It wasn't junk. It was my life before the ledger, my first design sketches, a ribbon from the state fair, and a locket my grandmother had left me, the one Matilda said was lost in the move 3 years ago. "She was throwing it away, Sandra," Lydia said softly, "putting it with the trash." I stared at the locket. I'd spent $2,000 covering my mother's grief counseling after she claimed she'd lost it. She hadn't lost it. She had held it hostage. Curry let out a low, mournful whine from the back seat, sensing the cold shift in my energy. He jumped into the front, resting his chin on the edge of the box, sniffing the old paper and metal. He looked at the locket, then up at me, his eyes wide. "She kept it to keep me coming back," I whispered. "She let me believe I was careless so she could stay the suffering mother." The twist wasn't greed, it was predation. They hadn't just taken my money, they'd dismantled my confidence, making me believe I owed them for my own perceived failures. I didn't call to yell. I simply took a photo of the locket in my hand and sent it to the family group chat, unblocked for one final second. "Found this in the trash.
Thanks for looking for it for 3 years. I hope the champagne in Aspen was worth the $2,000 I paid for your grief. I didn't wait for a reply. I blocked them all again, one by one. The clicks sounded like a gavel. Let's go, Curry, I said, putting the car in gear. We have a flight to catch. Curry gave a sharp, decisive bark and settled into his seat, his nose pressed against the glass as we headed toward the airport. He wasn't looking back, and for the first time, neither was I. The audit was complete, the past was reclaimed, and the only thing I was carrying into Seattle was the truth and a dog who never needed a locket to remember who I was. The airport was a blur of fluorescent lights, but the air felt cleaner than it had in a decade. I carried Curry in his mesh travel carrier, his little nose pressed against the screen, tracking every suitcase like a tiny, focused sentinel. He didn't whine. He sat in a regal silence, his weight a grounding presence against my side. Just as we reached the security line, my phone buzzed. It was Richard Jensen. "Sandra," he began, his voice tired, "I am sorry to bother you, but your father is here, at the office." My blood turned to ice. "Richard is at the firm?" "He's in the lobby," Jensen said quietly. "He says he won't leave until he speaks to you. He says he doesn't have a place to stay tonight." I gripped the strap of Curry's carrier until it bit into my shoulder. This was the final play, the homeless father gambit, the ultimate weapon in the Garner arsenal, designed to trigger 33 years of cultivated guilt. Curry let out a low, vibrating rumble from inside the carrier. He couldn't see my father, but he could hear my heart rate spiking. He pushed his warm body against the mesh, a physical reminder that I wasn't alone. "Tell him I'm not there, Richard," I said, my voice shaking but firm, "and tell him that Sabrina and Bailey signed a lease on a 1-bedroom 2 weeks ago. He has a place to stay, he just doesn't want to live in it." There was a long silence. "I'll let him know. Safe travels, Sandra. You earned this." I hung up and looked at the security gate. Beyond it lay Seattle, the rain, the bookstores, and a life where I didn't have to apologize for existing. "He's okay, Curry," I whispered, reaching through the zipper to scratch his ears. "He's just trying to call us back to a house that was never a home." Curry licked my fingertip, a quick gesture of approval. He settled back onto his fleece blanket as the line moved forward. We cleared security and walked toward the gate. I didn't check my bank app. I didn't check Instagram. I didn't look back at the entrance where my past was sitting in a lobby waiting for a check that would never be written. The twist was finally over. It wasn't that I was heartless, it was that I had finally found my heart, and it wasn't for sale.
The Seattle rain was exactly as I'd imagined, a soft, persistent gray that felt like it was washing away the desert dust of Santa Fe. I stood on the balcony, the smell of salt and coffee drifting up from the market. Curry sat beside me, his cinnamon fur damp from our walk, his nose twitching at 1,000 new scents. He looked different here, chest puffed out, alert to the foghorns. He wasn't guarding a door against a family that only wanted my money. He was just a dog in a new world. And for the first time, I felt like a woman in one too. I opened my laptop, not to check the bank, but to delete the bookmarks for the Albuquerque utilities. I edited my professional bio. Sandra specializes in creating spaces that reflect personal autonomy and peace. My phone buzzed. Message from Lydia. "Thought you should know. Sabrina sold the snowmobile and the fur coat. Bailey is driving a used sedan. Your parents are in the 1-bedroom. They're actually paying their own electric bill. The world didn't end, Sandra. It just adjusted." I felt a quiet bloom of relief. They weren't broken. They were just living within their means. The crisis had been a choice they made every month. By stopping the payments, I hadn't destroyed them. I had allowed them to grow up. Curry let out a sudden, sharp bark at a seagull on the railing. He didn't chase it. He just gave it an authoritative look until it took flight. Then he turned to me, his tail doing that slow, rhythmic thump against the deck. "We did it, Curry," I whispered. We stopped giving until it hurt. The twist wasn't that my family was evil, it was that they were small people who had convinced me I was only as big as my balance sheet.
I'd spent 33 years paying for a seat at a table where I was only tolerated for the bill I brought with me. I looked out at the Puget Sound, mirroring the sky. I wasn't the daughter who funded the vacations anymore. I was the architect of my own silence. "Hungry?" I asked. Curry's ears perked up instantly. He let out a joyful, yapping bark and trotted toward the kitchen. I set out his bowl, then made a plate for myself. I sat at the small wooden table by the window. There were only 2 chairs and only 1 person. But as Curry sat firmly on the rug at my feet, I realized the room was exactly as full as it needed to be. The debt was settled, the ledger was closed, and for the first time, I didn't owe a single soul an apology for my peace.